What happens when humans push the limits of nature only to find themselves face to face with one of Earth's deadliest predators? Billionaires seeking adventure, hikers lost in the wild, police officers on duty, and even school children in their playgrounds all have found themselves in the path of a hungry, enraged, or territorial bear. Some fought back, some ran, and some were never seen again. From the freezing rivers of Siberia to the vast forests of Wyoming, these real-life encounters prove that no amount of wealth, experience, or preparation can guarantee survival when nature decides to strike. Would you dare to venture into bear country after hearing these terrifying true stories? Viktor Mikhailov had always been a man of great ambition. Born into a modest family in Moscow, he had built his fortune through determination and sharp business skills. Over the years, he became one of Russia's wealthiest oil tycoons, owning several refineries and trading companies. Despite his wealth, Viktor was known for his bold personality. He prided himself on his strength and survival skills, often boasting that money had not made him weak. He enjoyed extreme adventures, from helicopter hunting to deep-sea fishing. His private winter lodge, hidden in the vast and unforgiving Siberian wilderness, was his retreat from the pressures of business and city life. The lodge stood alone among snow-covered pines, miles from the nearest town. It was a place of complete isolation where only the toughest could endure. Viktor had built it as a symbol of his independence, relying on a small security team for protection. However, he often dismissed their concerns about the dangers of the wild. He believed he could handle anything. The winter had been harsh, but that did not stop Viktor from planning his yearly ice fishing trip. The frozen river near his lodge was his favorite spot, where he could enjoy the cold air and silence. That morning, he ignored warnings from his guides and set out alone. He wanted to prove his strength, just as he had done many times before. Dressed in a heavy fur-lined coat, he made his way across the icy terrain. The cold bit into his skin, but he welcomed the challenge. The river stretched before him, partially frozen, with dark waters flowing beneath the ice. Viktor knelt near the edge, preparing his fishing gear. The air was still, and the only sound was the wind whistling through the trees. Unbeknownst to him, danger lurked nearby. The unusually warm winter had disturbed the natural hibernation of a massive Russian grizzly. Hungry and desperate, the bear had wandered far in search of food. It had caught Viktor's scent and followed, its instincts taking over. As Viktor focused on the water, the bear moved closer, its heavy paws silent in the snow. The moment he sensed something behind him, it was too late. The grizzly, driven by hunger, charged with terrifying speed. Viktor scrambled for his pistol, but his fingers were numb from the freezing air. He tried to aim, but the cold had made his movements slow. Before he could fire, the bear reached him, knocking him to the ground. Its massive claws tore into his coat, slashing deep into his flesh. The pain was unbearable, and his cries echoed through the empty wilderness. Viktor fought, but the beast was relentless. The grizzly bit down, its powerful jaws crushing his bones. With its immense strength, the bear dragged his broken body across the ice. The struggle ended as Viktor was pulled into the freezing river. The icy water swallowed him, his final breath lost beneath the surface. The bear, satisfied with its kill, vanished into the wilderness, leaving only torn fabric on the frozen ground. The night passed in silence, the icy wind sweeping over the frozen river. Viktor Mikhailov's lodge stood in darkness, untouched by the horror that had unfolded just miles away. His security team had grown concerned when he failed to return before sunset. They had warned him against traveling alone, but he had dismissed their fears. Now, as the hours stretched on, unease settled over them. At first light, they set out in search of their employer, following the path he had taken toward the river. The snow was undisturbed except for Viktor's footprints, leading toward the water's edge. They moved quickly, their breath visible in the freezing air. As they neared the river, one of them spotted something unusual near the ice. Scraps of dark fur lay scattered across the snow, torn from Viktor's coat. A trail of blood marked the ground, leading toward the broken edge of the frozen water. The ice had been disturbed, cracked, and pushed aside. Fear gripped them as they realized what had happened. One of the men stepped forward cautiously, peering into the river. The dark water flowed slowly, freezing at the edges. Nothing moved beneath the surface. There was no sign of Viktor. They called his name, their voices lost in the vast emptiness of the Siberian wilderness. The realization set in. He was gone. His body had been pulled under, lost to the depths, claimed by the cold and the beast that had taken him. The men stood in shock, struggling to comprehend what had happened. No one had expected such an end for a man as powerful as Viktor Mikhailov. He had built an empire, conquered industries, and outlasted rivals. Yet, in the end, it had not been business or betrayal that had taken him. It had been nature itself. The bear had disappeared, leaving behind only destruction. The security team had no choice but to return to the lodge and report what they had found. The news spread quickly, reaching Victor's business associates and the authorities. Helicopters were sent to search the area, but there was little hope. Days passed, and still, the river gave no sign of him. With temperatures dropping further, the ice thickened, sealing away any trace of what had occurred. In Moscow, news of his death sent shockwaves through the financial world. His company, once a symbol of strength, faced uncertainty. Without its leader, questions arose about its future. Rival businessmen watched closely, waiting for the right moment to seize control. Far from the chaos of the city, the Siberian wilderness remained unchanged. The snow continued to fall, covering the last traces of the struggle. The Grizzly, now deep in the forest, had moved on, following its instincts. It had not acted with malice, only with hunger. The land had claimed another soul, as it had done for centuries. In the end, Viktor Mikhailov, the man who had once believed he could conquer anything, had been proven wrong. In August 2024, Sarah Coleman set out for what she believed would be another unforgettable adventure. At 27 years old, she was full of energy and loved exploring the outdoors. Ever since she was a child, she had dreamed of hiking across the most beautiful landscapes in the country. Born and raised in Denver, Colorado, she had spent years preparing for trips like this. She had hiked through forests, climbed mountains, and camped under the stars. The Bob Marshall Wilderness in Montana had always been on her list, and now she was finally here, ready to experience its beauty. The Bob Marshall Wilderness was a vast and rugged area, filled with dense forests, steep cliffs, and fast-moving rivers. It stretched for over 1 million acres, making it one of the largest roadless areas in the United States. The trails were long and challenging, but Sarah had planned carefully. She carried a backpack filled with supplies, a map, and her phone for emergencies. She had told her family that she would be back in a few days, confident that she could handle the journey alone. The first day went smoothly. Sarah followed the marked trails, enjoying the fresh air and the peaceful sounds of nature. Birds chirped in the trees, and the wind rustled through the leaves. The sky was clear, and the sun shone brightly overhead. Everything felt perfect. She took pictures, made notes in her journal, and admired the stunning views around her. As the second day began, Sarah decided to explore deeper into the wilderness. The path she chose was less traveled, but she wasn't worried. She had always been good at finding her way. Hours passed, and before she realized it, she was far from where she had started. The trees became thicker and the terrain rougher. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. That was when she realized her mistake. She had wandered off the main trail, and she didn't know how to get back. Panic set in as she checked her phone. The battery was low, and there was barely any signal. She tried to retrace her steps, but every direction looked the same. The temperature dropped, and the forest grew darker. She knew she needed help. She dialed 911, praying for a connection. The call went through, but the signal was weak. She tried to explain her location, but before she could finish, the call dropped. She redialed, but there was no response. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. Heavy breathing, a low growl. She turned slowly and saw movement in the bushes. A massive grizzly bear stepped forward. Its dark eyes locked onto her. Sarah's heart pounded. She backed away, searching for an escape. She spotted a tree and scrambled upward, gripping the rough bark. The bear roared and swiped at her legs, its claws tearing through her pants. She lost her grip and fell, landing hard on the forest floor as the bear loomed over her. Sarah hit the ground with force, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. Before she could react, the grizzly lunged forward, its claws slashing across her back. Pain shot through her body as she struggled to crawl away. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down, dragging her deeper into the forest. Her muffled cries faded into the night, lost in the vast wilderness. By the time the sun rose over the Bob Marshall Wilderness, search teams had already begun their efforts. Sarah's family had reported her missing when she failed to check in. Local authorities, along with experienced rescuers, set out at first light, following the last known location from her phone's weak signal. Helicopters scanned the dense forest from above, while ground teams moved carefully through the rugged terrain, calling her name. Hours passed with no sign of her. The forest was eerily silent, the only sounds being the rustling leaves and distant cries of birds. Then, one of the searchers spotted something unusual near a small clearing. A torn backpack lay on the ground, its contents scattered. A few feet away, they found Sarah's call log, partially buried beneath dirt and leaves. The sight sent a chill through the team. They moved cautiously, scanning the area for any clues. The ground showed signs of disturbance, as if something heavy had been dragged. Claw marks scarred the tree trunks, deep scratches cutting through the bark. As they followed the trail, they came across patches of fur and dark stains on the leaves. Despite their training, the rescuers knew what this meant. The search continued for days, but no other traces of Sarah were found. The dense wilderness made the effort even more difficult. Wildlife officials examined the area and confirmed the presence of a large grizzly bear, likely drawn out of its usual territory due to hunger. Without food sources, bears sometimes become aggressive, especially in isolated areas. News of Sarah's disappearance spread quickly. Hikers and campers in the region were warned to stay on marked trails and avoid traveling alone. Experts reminded the public about the dangers of the wilderness, urging caution and preparation. The event left many shaken, as Sarah had been an experienced hiker, well aware of survival techniques. Her family held on to hope for as long as possible, but as weeks passed, reality set in. Without any remains, there was no closure. The forest had taken her, leaving behind only questions and sorrow. Eventually, the official report declared her missing and presumed dead, another tragic case of nature's unpredictability. The Bob Marshall wilderness remained unchanged, its beauty hiding the dangers that lay beneath. Those who ventured into its depths would remember Sarah's story, a reminder of how quickly an adventure could turn into something else. The grizzly that took her vanished into the wild, its presence felt but never seen again. In July 2023, the Whitman family set off on a road trip to the wilderness of Wyoming, eager to explore its vast landscapes. The family of four, originally from California, had been planning the journey for months. Mark Whitman, the father, worked as an architect, while his wife Lisa was a schoolteacher. Their two children, Noah, 16, and his younger sister Emily, 12, shared their parents' love for nature. Noah, especially, had been looking forward to the trip, fascinated by wildlife and adventure. After days of driving, they arrived at the park and settled into a campground near a forested area. Their RV provided comfort, and they spent the days hiking, taking pictures, and watching geysers erupt. The warm summer air was filled with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. The family marveled at the park's beauty, feeling far from the busy city life they had left behind. On the evening of July 14th, the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the campsite. The air grew cooler as they sat around a small fire, roasting marshmallows. Other campers had packed up for the night, and the area grew quiet. Signs throughout the park warned visitors about wildlife dangers, urging them to stay cautious. Rangers had emphasized the importance of keeping food locked away and avoiding dark areas alone. Despite the warnings, Noah stepped out of the RV later that night to use the restroom. He had been outside many times before and felt no reason to be afraid. The campground was peaceful, and the stars shone brightly overhead. The woods nearby seemed calm, with only the distant sound of an owl breaking the silence. As Noah moved away from the RV, an eerie stillness settled over the trees. Suddenly, a heavy rustling came from the undergrowth. Before he could react, a massive black bear charged out of the darkness. The powerful animal moved with terrifying speed, its dark shape barely visible in the dim light. Noah barely had time to turn before the bear slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. Sharp claws raked across his back as he struggled to crawl away. His screams pierced the night, sending a wave of panic through the RV. Lisa and Mark rushed to the door, their hearts pounding. They saw the bear gripping their son, dragging him toward the thick trees. His cries grew fainter as the beast pulled him into the darkness, disappearing into the vast wilderness. Mark ran forward, shouting and waving his arms, but it was too late. The forest swallowed them both, leaving only silence behind. Emily clung to her mother, tears streaming down her face as they stood frozen, unable to process the horror of what had just happened. As the minutes passed, The family remained in shock. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the distant rustle of leaves. The reality of the situation settled in. Noah was gone, taken by the wild in the place he had once dreamed of exploring. Mark stood frozen in place, staring at the dark forest where his son had disappeared. Lisa clutched Emily tightly, unable to move as fear and grief filled the air around them. The night was silent once more, but the horror of what had happened remained. Mark reached for his phone with shaking hands and called for help. His voice was barely steady as he explained the attack. Rangers responded quickly, arriving at the campground within minutes. Their flashlights cut through the darkness as they scanned the area, weapons ready. One ranger assured the family they would do everything possible to find Noah. Another warned that searching in the dark was dangerous. As the bear could still be nearby, they would have to wait until first light to begin tracking. The family sat inside the RV, unable to sleep. Lisa held Emily close, whispering words of comfort, though neither could stop their tears. Mark sat by the window, his hands clenched into fists. Hours passed slowly, each minute filled with unbearable silence. Outside, the rangers kept watch, scanning the tree line for any movement. As dawn broke, the search began. The rangers moved carefully, following tracks left in the dirt. Broken branches and deep claw marks led toward a dense area of trees near a small stream. A terrible sense of dread filled the air as they pressed forward. Further into the woods, they found Noah's backpack, torn and covered in dirt. A few feet away, they spotted more signs of struggle. The trees stood tall and still, but the evidence on the ground told a terrible story. Then, near the water's edge, they made a heartbreaking discovery. The remains of Noah lay scattered near the stream, his clothes ripped and stained. The bear had dragged him deep into the forest, leaving only traces of what had once been a young boy filled with excitement for the trip. The sight was too much to bear, and one of the rangers bowed his head in sorrow. The search had ended, but the pain had only begun. The news shattered the family. Lisa collapsed in grief, unable to accept the loss. Emily cried into her father's chest, her small body shaking. Mark stood silent, his face pale as he stared into the distance. The dream vacation had turned into a nightmare they could never escape. Rangers secured the area, searching for the bear responsible. Wildlife experts explained that food smells often attract bears to campsites, but sometimes attacks happen without warning. The park had seen tragedies before, but each one left behind unimaginable sorrow. A few days later, the family left the park, their RV filled with memories that would never be the same. The road stretched before them, but the journey no longer felt like an adventure. Back in California, friends and neighbors mourned with them, offering support. However, no words could ease the pain of losing Noah. The wilderness remained beautiful and wild, but for the Whitman family, it would always be the place where they lost a son, a brother, and a part of their hearts forever. On October 15, 2024, a team of Russian police officers moved through the dense Siberian wilderness, searching for a dangerous fugitive. The thick forest stretched endlessly in every direction, the towering trees casting long shadows under the cold autumn sky. The mission was led by Senior Officer Ivan Petrov, an experienced tracker who had spent years navigating the harsh terrain. Alongside him were Officer Sergei Mikhailov, a sharpshooter known for his steady aim, and Officer Pavel Romanov, a younger recruit eager to prove himself. Their objective was clear: locate and apprehend the fugitive hiding in an abandoned cabin deep in the woods. The fugitive, a wanted criminal named Viktor Sokolov, had escaped custody weeks earlier. He was last seen heading toward the remote wilderness, a place where few dared to venture. The officers knew the risks of pursuing him into the unforgiving landscape, but duty called. Armed and prepared, they followed faint tracks leading toward the rumored hideout. As they pushed deeper into the forest, the silence around them felt unnatural. The usual sounds of birds and small animals were absent, leaving only the crunch of their boots on the frosty ground. The cold air stung their faces, and the dense trees blocked much of the fading sunlight. Each step took them further from safety, but they remained focused on their mission. Unbeknownst to them, they were not the only ones moving through the trees. A massive Russian grizzly bear, disturbed from its preparations for hibernation, had been watching them. The bear had spent days gathering food before the long winter, and the sudden presence of humans in its territory was an unwelcome threat. Hidden among the trees, it waited, its powerful muscles tensed, ready to defend its ground. The officers reached a small clearing where the abandoned cabin stood in silence. The wood was rotting, and the roof was partially collapsed. They exchanged glances, each one understanding that their target could be inside. Ivan motioned for Sergei and Pavel to move in, their weapons raised as they approached the entrance. The wind howled through the trees, masking the sound of something massive shifting in the shadows. Then, without warning, the Grizzly charged. A blur of muscle and fur erupted from the undergrowth, its roar tearing through the silence. The officers barely had time to react before the beast was upon them. The bear slammed into Ivan with incredible force, sending him crashing to the ground. A sharp crack echoed as his ribs broke under the weight of the impact. Pain shot through his body, but before he could move, the Grizzly turned its attention to Sergei. It lunged forward, its powerful claws tearing through Sergei's uniform, dragging him to the ground. His screams filled the air as the beast mauled him, its massive jaws crushing down. Blood stained the cold earth, and within moments, Sergei's body lay still. Pavel fired his weapon, the gunshots ringing out, but the Grizzly showed no fear. The forest became a battlefield between man and beast, and survival hung in the balance. Pavel kept his hands steady as he fired another shot. The loud crack echoed through the cold air, but the bear remained aggressive. Its deep growl sent a chilling warning, but this time the bullet had struck close enough to make the animal hesitate. For a brief moment, it stopped moving, nostrils flaring as it decided whether to continue the attack or retreat. Blood covered the ground, soaking into the frozen earth beneath them. The weight of what had just happened settled heavily over Pavel as he stood frozen in place. Sergei's body lay motionless, his uniform torn and stained. His lifeless form was a grim reminder of how fast everything had changed. Just minutes ago, they had been tracking a fugitive, but now one of their own was gone. Nearby, Ivan struggled to breathe. The impact had left him with broken ribs, each breath sending sharp pain through his chest. His vision blurred, but he forced himself to stay awake. Pavel rushed toward him, knowing that getting him out of the forest was the only way to keep him alive. The Grizzly, still watching from a short distance, finally turned and disappeared into the dense trees, leaving behind a scene of destruction. Pavel pulled out his radio and called for help. The signal was weak in the remote wilderness, but he managed to send a brief message before static took over. Time moved slowly as he kept watch over Ivan, his grip on his rifle tight in case the bear returned. The cold grew worse as the sky darkened, and every second felt heavier. Hours later, backup arrived. A second team of officers moved quickly through the forest, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They found Pavel kneeling beside Ivan, his uniform covered in mud and blood. The team assessed the situation, their expressions grim as they looked at the aftermath. Two men had gone into the forest fully prepared for their mission, but now only one could walk out on his own. They carefully lifted Ivan, taking care not to worsen his injuries. The journey back was slow, each step reminding them of the dangers that lurked in the wild. The cold wind whispered through the trees, as if the forest itself had watched everything unfold. The next morning, news of the attack spread quickly. The people in nearby villages spoke in hushed voices, sharing what had happened deep in the Siberian wilderness. The bear had been defending its territory, unaware of the human mission. Some believed that nature had simply taken its course, while others mourned the loss of a dedicated officer. Sergei's funeral took place days later, attended by fellow officers and grieving family members. His bravery was honored, but his absence left a void that could never be filled. Ivan, still recovering, knew he had survived only because of Pavel's quick actions. The fugitive, who had witnessed the attack from his hiding place, later surrendered. Faced with the dangers of the wild, he chose prison over the unknown. In May 2024, the quiet town of Salmon, Idaho, was enjoying the warmth of late spring. Surrounded by thick forests and rolling hills, it was a peaceful place where wildlife often roamed close to homes and schools. The local elementary school sat near the edge of town, its playground lined with wooden fences and grassy fields where children played freely during recess. On a bright afternoon, students rushed outside after lunch, eager to enjoy their break under the sun. Laughter and excited voices filled the air as they ran across the playground. Some played tag, while others gathered near the swings. The teachers stood at a distance, keeping a watchful eye on the children, unaware of the danger approaching from the trees beyond the fence. Deep in the forest, a black bear had been wandering for days in search of food. The warm weather had disrupted its usual routine, and hunger had driven it closer to town. Confused and desperate, the bear followed a faint scent carried by the wind. Without realizing it, the animal had moved too far from its natural habitat. Soon it found itself near the school, where the sounds of children playing drew its attention. At first, the bear hesitated. It stood near the tree line, sniffing the air, its dark fur blending into the shadows. But the voices and movements from the playground piqued its curiosity. Slowly, it stepped forward, its large paws crunching against the dry grass. As it moved closer, a few students noticed something unusual beyond the fence. One boy, standing near the edge of the playground, spotted the animal first. His eyes widened as he pointed toward the dark figure emerging from the trees. At first, some of the other children thought it was a dog, but within moments, the teachers realized the danger. Panic spread quickly as the bear took a few more steps forward, now fully visible. The teachers reacted immediately. They clapped their hands and called out to the students, signaling them to return inside. The children, sensing the urgency, ran toward the school doors, their laughter replaced by fearful whispers. But amid the rush, one boy hesitated. His curiosity held him back as he turned toward the bear, taking small steps closer. The bear stopped and lifted its head, its deep eyes locking onto the child. It was not yet aggressive, but the sudden movement had startled it. A low growl rumbled from its throat, a warning sound that echoed through the playground. The teachers, now alarmed, called out again, urging the boy to move back. The bear took another step forward, its massive frame towering over the fence. The air felt heavy with tension as the teachers braced for what might happen next. The boy, finally realizing the danger, froze in place. The moment stretched long, each second filled with uncertainty, as the wild animal and the schoolyard faced each other in uneasy silence. The teachers acted quickly, moving toward the boy while keeping their eyes on the bear. One of them waved their arms, trying to distract the animal. The bear remained still for a moment, its dark eyes fixed on the small figure in front of it. The child, frozen in place, finally turned and ran toward the school doors. The bear let out another deep growl but did not chase him. As the last child rushed inside, the teachers secured the doors, making sure everyone was safe. Inside the building, nervous whispers filled the air. The children, now behind the windows, watched as the bear stood near the fence, still confused. Some pressed their hands against the glass, unable to look away from the unexpected visitor. The school immediately contacted local wildlife officials, who responded quickly. Within minutes, a group of trained professionals arrived, carrying equipment to handle the situation. They moved carefully, speaking in low voices to avoid startling the bear. The animal, still standing near the playground, sniffed the air, sensing unfamiliar scents. It paced back and forth, uncertain about its next move. The officials assessed the situation and decided to use a tranquilizer dart. One of them raised a rifle and aimed carefully, making sure not to miss. The others stood ready in case the bear reacted aggressively. A soft thud broke the silence as the dart struck the bear's thick fur. The animal flinched, letting out a deep grunt before stepping back. For a few moments, nothing happened. The bear shook its head, confused by the sudden sensation. Then, slowly, its legs became unsteady. It took a few sluggish steps before lowering itself to the ground. The powerful creature, now under the effect of the tranquilizer, closed its eyes as its breathing became slow and steady. The wildlife team moved in carefully, checking to ensure the bear was fully sedated. They worked quickly, securing the animal for transport. The children and teachers, still watching from the windows, let out quiet sighs of relief. The danger had passed, but the memory of the moment remained fresh in their minds. After loading the bear onto a transport vehicle, the officials assured the school staff that the animal would be relocated far from town, where it could safely return to its natural habitat. They reminded everyone to stay cautious in areas near the wilderness, as bears and other wildlife could sometimes wander too close. The school took immediate action to improve safety measures. The playground fence was reinforced, and new warning signs were placed around the area. Teachers held special lessons to educate students about wildlife encounters and the importance of staying alert in nature. The young boy who had approached the bear remained shaken by the event. Though unharmed, he learned an important lesson about respecting wild animals. The incident became a reminder to the entire town that nature, while beautiful, could also be unpredictable. The schoolyard returned to normal in the following days, but the memory of the bear's visit stayed with everyone. On October 21st, 2023, K-9 officer Alex Porter and his loyal police dog, Rex, prepared for another day of duty in Jackson, Wyoming. Alex had spent years serving the town, known for its breathtaking mountains and wildlife. He was passionate about protecting his community, and Rex was more than just a partner. He was family. Rex, a well-trained German shepherd, had been with Alex for nearly 4 years. The two had worked together on countless missions, from tracking lost hikers to assisting in search operations. Rex had an unshakable bond with his handler, always staying by his side no matter the danger. That morning, reports of a grizzly bear sighting near an elementary school had raised concerns. Wildlife sightings were common in Wyoming, but a bear wandering too close to children posed a serious risk. Alex and Rex were called to investigate, hoping to ensure the safety of the town. As they reached the wooded area near the school, the forest was silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves. Alex moved carefully, scanning the surroundings for any signs of the animal. Rex, alert and focused, sniffed the air, searching for the bear's scent. Then, without warning, a massive grizzly burst from behind a tree. The bear, startled and aggressive, charged straight at them. Alex barely had time to react. He reached for his weapon and fired a shot, but the bear was too fast. In seconds, it knocked him to the ground, its enormous weight crushing him beneath its powerful body. Alex felt a sharp pain as the bear's claws raked across his arm and chest. The impact left him gasping for breath, struggling to move. His vision blurred as he tried to reach for his radio, but his strength was fading. Rex, seeing his partner in danger, sprang into action. The brave dog lunged at the grizzly, biting at its legs and barking furiously. The bear roared in frustration, momentarily distracted by Rex's relentless attacks. Alex, fighting through the pain, seized the opportunity to crawl toward his radio. His fingers trembled as he pressed the button, calling for backup. The grizzly swiped at Rex, sending him tumbling across the ground. But the determined dog got back up, refusing to leave Alex's side. Blood stained his fur, but he stood firm, growling at the bear. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then, just as suddenly as it had attacked, the bear turned and fled into the forest. Whether it was the sound of approaching sirens or Rex's fearless resistance, something had driven it away. Alex lay on the ground, breathing heavily. His wounds were severe, and blood soaked his uniform. Rex limped toward him, whimpering but refusing to leave his side. The officer reached out a weak hand to his faithful companion as the distant sound of rescuers grew closer. The fight was over, but the battle to survive had only just begun. Alex Porter lay on the cold ground, his breaths shallow and uneven. His uniform was torn, and his body ached from the deep wounds left by the grizzly. Blood stained the dirt around him as pain spread through his chest and arms. Rex, injured but alert, stayed beside him, trembling from exhaustion. The faint sound of sirens grew louder, signaling the arrival of help. Emergency responders rushed through the forest, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Paramedics reached Alex and immediately assessed his injuries. His pulse was weak, and his skin was pale. They moved quickly, stopping the bleeding and stabilizing him. Carefully, they lifted him onto a stretcher, avoiding the worst of his wounds. Rex had deep scratches along his side and a limp in his front leg. His fur was matted with blood, but his eyes stayed fixed on Alex as the paramedics worked on him. The officers present knew the dog had saved his handler's life. They placed a gentle hand on Rex, reassuring him as he whined softly. Alex was rushed to the nearest hospital, where doctors fought to keep him stable. His injuries were critical, and he required immediate surgery to repair the damage from the bear's attack. Hours passed as the medical team worked tirelessly. Meanwhile, officers took Rex to a veterinarian, where his wounds were cleaned and treated. He needed rest, but his condition was not life-threatening. The news of the attack spread quickly through the small town. Residents who knew Alex as a dedicated officer and kind-hearted man gathered outside the hospital, waiting for updates. Many expressed concern for Rex, calling him a hero for his bravery. The school, where the bear had first been spotted, held an emergency meeting to discuss better safety measures. Officials worked with wildlife experts to prevent another incident from happening. Days later, Alex finally woke up. His body was weak and every movement brought pain, but he was alive. The first request he made was to see Rex. Officers brought the loyal dog into the hospital room, his tail wagging despite his injuries. The reunion was emotional, and the bond between them remained unbroken. The town decided to honor Rex for his courage. A special ceremony was held, where he received a medal for his service. People cheered as he stood proudly beside the officers, his presence a reminder of his fearless actions. The event brought the community together, reinforcing their respect for law enforcement and their K-9 partners. Alex faced months of recovery, undergoing physical therapy to regain his strength. Despite the hardship, he remained grateful for the dog who had saved his life. He knew that without Rex, the outcome would have been far worse. The attack left a lasting impact on the town, reminding everyone of the dangers of wildlife. The incident also highlighted the loyalty and bravery of police dogs. No one would forget the day Rex stood against a grizzly, refusing to back down to protect his partner.